Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to this latest installment of News Digest by Masters in Supply Chain. I'm joined by my friend Rick McDonald, who was the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Clorox Companies. Rick, how are you enjoying retirement? And I'm sure with you, retirement is a little R. You're still keeping abreast and involved in our world. How's your world going?
John, first of all, great to see you, John, and
Yeah.
thanks very much for inviting me to join today. Small R retirement is going well. I've learned a couple things about myself in the early days of retirement. One is that I'm not very good at it.
Yeah.
And number two, I'm an awful executive admin, and shout out to Beverly Thomas over at Clorox. she, she kept me organized for a long, long time, and so I've really had to learn how to do that sort of stuff. But I call this chapter doing fun things with fun people, and I'm really enjoying engaging with a number of supply chain technology founders and CEOs, and lending my advice and voice where I can be helpful.
That's terrific. So, yeah, and amen. Both your executive admin and your IT department probably the key missing components in your afterlife. Hey, I'm interested. We've been talking about just supply chain disruption in general, and the latest bite at this is tariffs, and it's soon to be hurricanes, and before that, obviously COVID was in the mix. But we were sort of seeing this the last 10 years. Everything seems new, but if you sort of get far enough away and maybe retirement or at least out of the full-time day rat race allows you a chance to look at it. Every year you had something, there was always something that came our way. And you and I had talked offline. The maybe the one thing that sort of seems incontrovertible is when you're in the middle of a disruption, yes, there's all kinds of things you can do on the supply chain side, but being married to your commercial strategy, and ensuring that you are operating as a business as opposed to, well, what's the supply chain going to do to fix this, or what's the business going to do to fix this? But instead, it's whole. This a business alignment thing. Is real. And I think if you've experienced it and you've experienced it when it's great, you talk about it in a way that people that haven't experienced it sort of look at you like you have three heads. And, this idea of how do you get aligned? How do you just make sure that you've built that fiber? I'm interested. Are you seeing that as you're talking with fun people about fun things?
Yeah, I absolutely am. And the strategy cascade, there are a bunch of versions of it, but generally four pillars: goals and aspirations, where to play, how to win, and how to configure. And companies that do that well and thoroughly and wait for the configuration choices, which often involve the supply chain, have a much better chance of success. That alignment, that integration, that mutually shared understanding of the key leverage points and how to actually make the enterprise go are super critical and super important. And it takes quite a while, I found, as even an organization, to kind of hone that skill, hone that craft of being able to develop strategy. And this alignment just proves itself time and time again. I'll call it non-war times, let's just say pre-COVID. Lots of approaches were successful. Mistakes could be made. You could recover fairly quickly. Certainly during COVID, we learned that that alignment was absolutely crucial and critical in terms of being able to perform and execute during the most difficult time of really all of our lives.
Do you find that most people are good at that? I mean, is it natural? I tend to find that small companies are pretty good at it because they literally fit into each other's sentences and they look across the one office and the desk they're sharing, and they can work through things. Big companies, not so much all the time, to be honest. And you sort of get in your fiefdoms, you do your deal. To be honest, from a personal standpoint, when I first took over the global role and the integrated supply chain role, the truth was I knew manufacturing, I knew procurement, but the orchestration part was the part that was the mystery. I had to work hard on that stuff. Do you see the same thing? And do you think we're ready for what comes next?
Well, that's a great and correct question. I do see that a lot, and I reflect what you're saying about smaller companies being able to be more nimble, more adaptable. They do fit each other's sentences. They're together an awful lot, whether it's in person or virtually, and there are
Hmm.
just fewer of them to create policies, to create bureaucracy, to move in ways that would not facilitate orchestration or speed. And by and large, I don't think we're necessarily wired that way. Almost all of us grew up as some sort of a functional expert.
Right.
Many of us have not traversed the width or depth of the supply chain, and therefore we know what we know when we get to the roles that we get to. I had the good fortune of having roles from procurement all the way to the customer shelf. And so in my mind, I would think about the supply chain with a general manager's mindset. And I think that's the way most successful professionals in those roles, they either have that coming in or they develop it quickly, which allows them to be really good business partners.
So I agree with you. I think you are running a gigantic P&L. And to the extent that you can develop capabilities that truly do enhance the profit line, and you can help, certainly that makes a difference. On-shelf availability, all of the service aspects of the role, and then obviously the cost that we can all measure 10 ways from Tuesday. Is there a set of ingredients? Is there a philosophy that you think is important to drive this sort of business alignment? And how do we get better at just supply chain planning and marrying up with those commercial folks?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, and I don't think this is unique to me, but one of the things that I did in a number of my roles was I really wanted to put myself in my other functional peers' shoes, meaning walking the market, understanding assortment, merchandising, pricing, shelving, looking at the marketing campaigns, who is the target consumer for our products. I felt like it made me a better leader and I could explain more about what we were doing and why we were doing it, even though there were some times when you'd stare at something as maybe a less informed supply chain person and you'd scratch your head and go, why are we doing this? There was almost always a really great reason why we were doing that behind being obsessed with the consumer. And so I think that's one of the things that all of us could do is become much more knowledgeable about what's going on with our functional partners and the struggles they're trying to overcome, and how in service of that and in service of the business objectives, the supply chain can be a lever for that performance.
Yeah,
Um,
it's taking the supply chain and making it a value chain. Thinking the more links, more connections to the customer, and the roles that everybody gets to play.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I agree with that. And you asked something about kind of this area of where we're going with demand and supply planning. And I just think it's such a critically important topic. And, there are all sorts of elements of machine learning and artificial intelligence embedded in that.
Uh-huh.
And I think about all that as operating at the speed of the consumer.
Yep.
There's not one of us that would raise our hands and say, yeah, we don't want same day service. We don't want next day delivery. I think in most cases, McKinsey did a study and 80% of people felt like next day delivery that was a requirement. And 40% felt that same day delivery was a requirement. So the world is speeding up, consumer and retailer expectations are speeding up, and therefore supply chains have to speed up.
Do you think the answer is we predict better, or do you think the answer is we respond better, or is the answer yes?
All of the above. I'm
Okay.
going to throw in a couple of bingo words here: resilience and agility. But I
Sure.
also think it's predicting better, and it's leveraging tools that allow us to see ahead, see around the next couple of corners with respect to the forecast. We all have our historical models. That's great for your regular turn business, but what it's not great for is the stuff that you can't see, the unexpected events, the promotions that undersell or oversell. And for that, you need some differentiated capability. Likewise, for these black swan, gray swan events, the resiliency in my mind is the insurance policy you build. It's the steps you take to be prepared. And then the agility is the part that after it's happened, how quickly can you pivot? How quickly can you decide? How quickly can you make, sort of in-game adjustments, if you will, to countermeasure, to counteract whatever's occurred.
So obviously, the technology is proving itself to be able to work in a way seamlessly. The best companies are starting to integrate these models. They're able to learn, and obviously the machines are working faster than you and I ever could. They're looking at way different data sets. They're able to move faster, maybe not predict the black swans, but clearly help us deal with the day-to-day, this speed of the consumer thing you talked about. Are you finding that companies you work with are ready? Are the employees ready? How do you sort of view the state of the people?
Yeah, I think directly to answer that question, some are ready, some are not. Some think they're ready.
Right.
The one big element, and if we have time, we talk about digital transformations. I think change management is an underinvested, overlooked, often just undervalued capability that is essential to these digital transformations. But specifically in the planning space, the leading companies are moving to something called adaptive planning. And this is leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's basically overhauling our traditional approaches to demand, supply, and inventory optimization. Some of the legacy systems, we will not get into specific names, but some of the legacy systems in the Gartner Magic Quadrant have, the architectures have been operating well for a long period of time. The scenario sampling is there, but it's sort of a one-off, one at a time type approach. And in my opinion, that's just not sufficient for the speed with which we have to operate, kind of back to that operating at the speed of the consumer. You want to be able to do your forecasting and your simulations in seconds and minutes instead of hours, days, weeks. And there's a big generational gap between the new tools that are coming in and the ones that have existed.
Right. There's a bit of innovator's dilemma that we're finding with what ironically has become hard iron of some ERP systems and other kinds of big answers, where the little guys are just nimble. Philosophically, do you layer that on top? Do you have something that's robust underneath and you sort of hang different things off of it, or how are you seeing those approaches work for companies that are starting this journey?
Yeah, there's a company that I'm aware of that I work with a little bit called CSCO, and they've got a Salesforce platform. It's open architecture, and it does all the things we were just talking about in terms of speed and taking a lot of the human decision-making time out of the equation. And it runs standalone. It runs on top of other platforms. And I think, that tool and others like it are going to be the things that companies pivot to make sure that they're operating at the right pace for their retailers, for their customers, for their consumers.
So as you see this adoption, you mentioned change management, transformation. Is this a pilot that becomes a lighthouse that becomes something that everybody wants to be part of, and that's sort of the way to do this? Is this a declaration from on high, and we're going to start doing stuff, and then you have really intensive, heavy labor change management to help people through? What have you seen be successful?
Yeah, this goes back to the very first thing we started talking about, John, which is this importance of strategic direction, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. And for companies that have chosen digital transformations, and hopefully all have started, maybe some are going even faster, but digital transformations are, I think, strategic declarations from the senior leadership of the company. What that does is it informs the rest of the company. Here's where we're going, of course, but it also, it doesn't root out those who would like to not change at all or change anything. It does signal to them that, something different's happening, and they have a choice to either, sort of upskill, reskill, and come along, or perhaps self-select out, or perhaps they have to be coached out. But one way or the other, this digital transformation idea really has to be a leadership-led, leadership-driven thing, and it cannot be about the tools. It's got to be about the leadership mindset first, the upskilling, reskilling of the crew, then the tools follow, and over the top of that is robust change management.
Rick, it's been argued, and maybe it's just incontrovertible, that the younger generation comes in, they're much more facile with these tools. They're much more comfortable participating in these spaces. I had a discussion a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago with someone who said that now the question is, so that's great. They know how to use the tools. And oh, by the way, the tools are probably better than the people, so there's less mistakes being made. What's the impact of development? You and I learned through the School of Hard Knocks maybe how to think from being in a function to being in a supply chain and orchestrating. And, we had, for better or for worse, the benefit of being wrong as the way to help navigate. Now I come in and, I know how to use the tools, and I'm not very often wrong. Where do the spidey senses come from? How do you learn? Maybe the answer is, well, if you don't make mistakes, does it really matter that much until you get into the black swan? I don't know, but gray hair might have some benefit at some case.
I agree with that. I think, first of all, the tasks and roles and workflows in companies that are very transactional, heavily data laden, people pounding away on keyboards, maybe they're holding together two systems manually. those are ideal candidates for things to move to automation like right away.
Sure, of course.
The part you're talking about is the experiential learning. And, at 3 a.m. when something went wrong in your manufacturing plant and you were the only supervisor in it, you learn pretty quickly what to do and maybe what not to do. I'm not sure how we're going to replicate that except to have leaders involved in the process of coding these agents. And I don't mean technically coding them, but understanding the approach the agent is going to take to solve those problems and where the curbs have been set, where the boundaries are and limits. And using that in a way to inform themselves about what types of dots connect, and maybe be able to do that faster than the experiential learnings. You and I have probably all worked in plants that weren't operating well. You got a learning every 5 minutes about what you could do to improve something. Conversely, if you worked in a plant that ran really well, you could go a long time without being really challenged with something that would be important to you later in your career. So I think the experiences with some agentic AI and some of these new capabilities will be experience forming for managers coming through.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe, harkening back to those days of you're on third shift and something goes bump in the night. The other thing you learn is that you could fix 100 things, but maybe you just fix a couple, get them foundational, and then fix the next couple. I think as you talk about transformation, it all looks fabulous. And all are appropriate applications, but to avoid the whack-a-mole that inevitably happens as you're trying to fight your way through this, picking the things that have the most impact, that are foundational, getting them in place, and then building from that foundation becomes potentially a roadmap for success for people.
Yeah, 100%. What you just said there was materiality matters. And I think all of us have learned as we've gone through to not get enamored with, the shiny something or other in the corner that really doesn't make a huge difference in terms of your financial, reputational, people, customer risk profile. It is really to make sure you prioritize properly. What are those most largest things to solve? And again, this is where I think the technology can really help out here. Back to our conversation on demand planning, supply planning, inventory optimization. Think about what companies could do and how much less warehousing we'd all need if in fact we could do even 10% better, 15% better at predicting our demand forecast and then having a supply plan that matched that.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, hey, Rick, thank you for your time today. It was great catching up with you. Appreciate your thoughts and perspective. And maybe one of the things we're just continuing to learn is that, supply chain can amend itself and change itself depending on the context and the environment, but the basics are still there. You got to be close to your business partners. You got to be able to see and adjust, and maybe to now the question is, how can we adapt the latest technology and the tools in order to make sure we're at the top of our game? Because I think, as you mentioned, you're either in that game or you won't be around very long.
That's absolutely right, John. Very well said. My pleasure being with you today, and thanks a lot for having me.
Hey, terrific. For those of you who are joining in, thanks for your time today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button and hit subscribe. We bring you these perspectives from knowledgeable folks on what's going on in our world, and hopefully this news digest met the bill for you.